Hello, everyone. Welcome to Unit 8, Day 4. Today, we are continuing our discussion about evolution by talking about exactly how the process of natural selection leads to evolution. So let's go ahead and get started. So today's aim is how does natural selection result in evolution? And remember that natural selection is really the mechanism through which evolution happens. So let's get started with the do now. And always, every time we see evolution, we know that that is change over time. So a student noticed that male peacocks have very beautiful and elaborate feathers, while female peacocks are rather plain. He hypothesized that once all peacocks may have been rather plain, but the males with more attractive feathers were able to reproduce more and created offspring that also had elaborate feathers. Over time, there were fewer and fewer plain males as they were more likely to die without reproducing. Do you think the student's theory of peacock evolution is Darwinian or Lamarckian? So go ahead and pause this video and answer. All right, so was this theory Darwinian or Lamarckian? If you said it was Darwinian, you were right, baby. So this is Darwinian because the student's theory said that the peacocks with the more beautiful feathers would be able to survive and reproduce more. This would mean that this is explaining this through natural selection. The more beautiful feathers give them an advantage, being able to make more baby peacocks. The beautiful feathers were not an acquired trait that is passed on. So they weren't acquired during lifetime like Lamarck would theorize. All right, so part A is notes. And the first thing that we're going to discuss is natural selection. So go ahead and write your own definition of natural selection. Pause this video, write your own definition, and then meet me to discuss the definition that I'm going to give you and compare your definition to that one. Oh. Natural selection is the process where organisms with favorable traits are more likely to reproduce. They pass on these traits to the next generation. So those more favorable traits are determined by their environment, what makes them the most fit to survive and reproduce in their given environment. Excuse me. Over time, this process allows organisms to adapt to their environment. But remember, wait, that's wrong. Over time, this process allows populations to adapt to their environment. Over many generations, this process allows populations to adapt to their environment. There we go. We fixed that definition, kids. Because remember, organisms do not evolve. Populations do. The one organism that is born with a favorable adaptation for the first time will have more reproductive success. They will get the most chicks. And as a result, that their offspring will become dominant in the next generation. So, factors that affect natural selection. The first one, environmental change. So, example, a population of giraffes feeds on the leaves of small bushes on the ground and short trees. Suddenly, their environment changes. After a drought, all of the bushes on the ground die. The giraffes are left with only taller trees to eat from, though some giraffes have necks that can reach those leaves, others do not. So how does the changing environment affect natural selection here? The giraffes with short necks are going to die. And as a result, we will get a new population of giraffes with long necks, because those long-necked ones will be the ones who survive long enough to have babies. Environmental change will make it more likely for the giraffes to go through natural selection and evolution, because those with tall necks were surviving longer and reproducing more. Sorry, guys, I'm like disagreeing with my PowerPoint as I'm presenting to you. So this means that this environmental change is a selection pressure. This change to the environment will make it more likely that the giraffes are actually going to have an evolutionary event where the entire population is going to change and maybe possibly even become a new species, have a speciation event. So these factors that affect natural selection are selection pressures, things that make a population change. So environmental change will make it more likely for these giraffes to actually go through natural selection, and the trait that will be selected for is tall necks, because those giraffes can survive and reproduce more in this changed environment. Factor number 2 is competition. Example, a population of birds uses their beaks to dig into soil and find worms to eat. The birds have a variety of beak sizes, but since there was always an abundant supply of worms, all of the birds were able to feed. One spring, the worm population decreased dramatically due to a disease, and the birds had to compete over the worms. Birds with the longest beaks were able to dig deepest into the soil and find enough worms to survive. Brainstorm. How does competition affect natural selection? Oh, one of these birds is dead. Competition makes it more likely for the birds to go through natural selection and evolution. Again, this is a selection pressure, because those with longer beaks were able to survive longer and reproduce more, and the birds with short beaks died. This is key. Death is a major driving force of evolution. This is another reason why human beings are a poor example for examining evolution, because we do all kinds of things to make sure that people who would normally naturally die live longer, right? We save human beings when they are about to die. We help people who wouldn't be able to survive on their own. So some scientists would argue that we're no longer evolving because of that, because we've removed all of these natural selection pressures from ourselves as a species. Other scientists would argue maybe we haven't, but it's why we don't usually discuss human evolution, although I know it's very spicy and interesting topic. So now another factor that affects natural selection is variation. Variation, this one is maybe my favorite. So in the previous two examples, the populations of giraffes and birds had inherent variation. The giraffes have different sized necks, and the birds had different types of beaks. What would have happened if all of the giraffes had identical short necks? What would have happened if all of the birds had identical small beaks? Would the populations have evolved? No. They would have gone extinct. They would have all died. So that is what happens, right? The way natural selection works is it can select for everyone is going to die, but it will also select the best traits for this new environment, for the competition that exists between species. It will select the best trait available from the potential genetic variation in the population, and that trait will become more prevalent, more common over time. So, describe the relationship between variation and natural selection. Variation leads to natural selection because there is a trait to select. If all the giraffes had short necks, they're just going to be extinct, new species. No variation, extinction. Variation will lead to natural selection. It will select, nature will select the best variant, the best allele, the best gene in the population. No variation will lead to extinction. In the face of environmental change or competition, they're gonna die. So part B, pair practice. Where is the variation coming from? So highlight all the processes below that can result in variation in a population. Meiosis, right, with crossing over, the creation of gametes. Recombination, that again happens during crossing over, the combination of gametes that gives us more variation in a population. Sexual reproduction gives us more variation in the population because there's two parents. And mutations give us more variation in a population because there's two parents. So now, last question. A farmer often sprays a certain kind of insecticide, a chemical that kills insects on his plants to prevent locust bugs from eating all of his corn crops. One day, there was a random change in the sequence of DNA in a locust egg. When the egg cell hatched, the locust was resistant to the insecticide. It would not be killed by it. Since that locust could survive and reproduce, natural selection occurred until the entire population evolved to become resistant. Identify the variation that existed in the insect population and identify the process that created this variation. So the variation is a resistance to non-resistance to insecticide. And how did that happen? There was a mutation, a random change in the sequence of DNA. That is a mutation. But that change was so important in this environment where there's constantly insecticide being sprayed that all of the other locusts died. And just our one locust buddy that had this random mutation became the boss. So that mutation that was random in this environment where insecticide was sprayed all the time became an adaptation. And that is the end of that, ladies and gentlemen. So go ahead and complete your exit ticket. Today's aim was how does natural selection result in evolution? And we talked about the selection pressures that can lead a population to change over time. So I hope you enjoyed that lesson. Have a super fantastic day, and I'll see you guys as soon as possible on Zoom. Bye.